I'm delighted to introduce our closing speaker, Dr. David Krause. I, I don't know in your own personal life if you get messages like, got a minute? And you happen to be speaking in some faraway land and get these text messages or these cryptic emails. Well, normally I fear and loathe those types of questions. And by the way, I send those questions to my staff. Are you free? You got a sec? But Dr. Krause does send me these messages on an intermittent basis. And typically he wants to discuss pithy stuff. So as you know from the original agenda, Dr. David Begay was to have been with us today, and he took ill last week and was unable to make the trip here to Phoenix. So it was my turn to send Dr. Krause a message. Hey, you got a minute? Paybacks are hell, sir. There you go. But he generously agreed at the last minute to change his schedule for this week to join us. Dr. Krause is quite familiar with this conference because he's attended it in the past to provide training and presentations on things like Legionella and indoor air quality. David is a recognized expert in a variety of different issues related to environmental health. He's a toxicologist with over 30 years of experience on the front lines of both environmental and occupational health. As Florida's former state toxicologist, he has integrated some of the most complex public health challenges of our time. And these are really interesting projects he's been involved in. The health impacts of Chinese-made wallboard emissions to pediatric cancer clusters, and he was involved in the Deepwater Horizon disaster response and recovery. With that, I hope that you will join me in welcoming Dr. David Krause.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. And thank you, everyone, for inviting me to this wonderful session. I didn't get to attend too much of the presentations, but those that I saw were well worth the visit, well worth the trip. Again, thank you for inviting me here today and moving to allow me to speak at such an important time in our history as environmental health professionals. Hopefully there we go. I'm going to try to speak today about being on the front lines of public health and spotting what's over the horizon, spotting those emergency health threats and trends that inevitably make the next day different from the first. So first I'm just going to try to set the stage. What is the mission of EH professionals? Well, that's a very broad and wide spectrum, hundreds of educational sessions that they put on this conference. Everything from food to water to indoor air, health and daycare and sewage. We touch, as environmental health professionals, every sector of people's lives from cradle to grave. And most people in this country really don't have a clear understanding of what we do. And I think a lot of that is we often don't get to write our own story. So I think that's one aspect we all deserve and we all need to be able to improve as we move forward. The critical role of environmental health professionals has been certainly seen by myself. I feel like I've had in my career, a front seat, but in kind of the middle of the EH departments. I've worked in various capacities in the state of Florida for environmental health and as a private consultant for many years throughout my career. I remember the first time I was sent to do some training on indoor air quality for people in Hillsborough County and Tampa and West Palm Beach and all over the state of Florida. I have literally been in every county from Pensacola to Key West throughout the state. And I came back to my boss, Mike Gilley, who was in charge of the program at that time, and I said, whatever you do, don't make me go to work there full time. These people are out there cutting the heads off of raccoons and digging up dirt. And, I mean, this is crazy. This is crazy. So he really wanted me to understand, the variety of things that are out there. And I was very fortunate because I came bearing gifts of money and positions. Back in 1994, we established indoor air programs throughout the state. We'll talk a little bit how that ended up, but there was change then, and there's change now. So in this time of rapid, unpredictable change, it feels like we're all, and it's not just environmental health, we're all under assault for budgets and access and the ability to speak and express what's important. So I'll talk a little bit about that. And then also misinformation. The World Wide Web and the internet have been great in many ways, but it's easier, it seems, to spread misinformation than good information, right? A healthy diet of meat and potatoes and vegetables doesn't go down as quickly as Rice Krispie treats, and we certainly are seeing that. And distrust of science, and that is the most disturbing thing I think that I've observed over the past 10 years, is a growing distrust of what science is and how we communicate. So I want to talk a little bit of that as I move on about how we can practice science and communicate with the public in a way that allows us to be honest in uncertainty and prevalence and incidence, but also give people solid information that they can use. So again, I'm going to talk a little bit from out of the daily issues that you deal with as environmental health professionals. And when we start talking about the future, we want to talk about, often the here and now. So we're going to look at any of these issues, where we're at now, what we know now, what we think now, and how it affects us at the present. But we learn so much from the past. And we know that if we forget those lessons from the past, if we don't apply them, if we think that mattered 100 years ago but doesn't matter now, we will pay that price. And when you're making decisions about what to do next, what to prioritize, what to budget, what to fund, what to defund, you have to look at the present, but really you should be looking at the future. How is this going to affect next week, next month, next year, next generation? And I think we're certainly going to see that as we move forward. A little bit about myself. Dave gave you the short and sweet part of it. I will admit I am Florida born and raised. Take that as you will. Yeah, I get Carl Hyacin should be our national poet and our state poet and author. But was born and raised in Tallahassee and Florida State University. Attended University of South Florida College of Public Health for both my master's and doctorate. After I graduated from FSU, I went through ROTC and was commissioned a lieutenant in the U.S. Army Artillery. Great job, red legs. Left my hearing there as well, but we all leave something behind. But that experience, which is not typical of most people in environmental health, as I learned, it gave me some perspectives and taught me some lessons on accountability, responsibility, mission accomplishment. And that's one environment where as an officer, as a leader, you're not a manager, you're a leader. And as a leader, you are responsible for everything your unit does or fails to do. And when I have those conversations with some of my employees, they look at me like I have two heads. So I'm responsible for things that other people don't do. Well, if you're a leader, you are. So those experiences were certainly helpful. Also seeing the world change. 1989. What happened? Fall of the Berlin Wall. Fall of the dissolution of the Soviet Union. And as someone who was literally in a frontline unit during that period in Germany, we had no notice that that was going to happen. Our leadership, our commanders throughout Europe, and we literally were given daily briefings on what should be happening, were kind of shrugging their shoulders saying, keep your eyes out. Look to see what's happening. But the reconnaissance, the forewarning of that was practically zero, certainly at our level. And what that instilled in me was an appreciation of when you don't know what's happening tomorrow or don't have a clue of what's happening tomorrow, today gets really uncertain and scary. So looking into the future, having that intelligence brief, having that reconnaissance and surveillance moving forward certainly has made me feel a lot more comfortable coming to work every day. So I ended up, after the Army, ended up going into public health, was hired as the industrial hygienist for the Florida Department of Health, the one and only industrial hygienist. I walked in on day one and had an 18-month backlog on efforts. But was very fortunate in the person I worked for, Dr. Roger Inman, who was a state toxicologist at the time, had lobbied for and received over $750,000 in budgets to set indoor air programs up throughout the state of Florida. So instead of one guy who would travel around and get 30 projects, cases, investigations done a year, we had 25 who were at the local level. And our first year, we performed over 5,000 responses, investigations, site visits, educational efforts. And so in the big scheme of money, of things, a fairly small budget, we took a small program and made it big. I think we've made a big effort and a big change in the lives of the citizens of Florida in being able to respond to indoor air quality issues, complaints, everything from carbon monoxide to mold to formaldehyde to pesticide poisonings. So that's really where I started seeing things that weren't in the book, because a lot of the things we were doing, there was no book. I did that for several years, became a private consultant, eventually went back as state toxicologist in 2008, again for the Florida Department of Health, and I swear I must have a target on my back, because it seems like less than a month in the job, every crisis that could hit the books came to my desk. So in 2008, we started to see the effects of corrosive drywall show up in homes throughout Florida, throughout the Southeast. I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but this was, again, something that had never been seen before, had never been documented. The chemistry behind it, the reality of it, was it biological, chemical, radiological? What was this? Was it a health threat? Was it not a health threat? Could you smell it? Could you not smell it? What's going on? What was interesting about that one was normally in the health departments, our clientele, the people we're helping the most, are on the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum. They're not the wealthy. They're not the leadership. They're not the lieutenant governor. The Chinese drywall issue, that wasn't the case. Literally, it wasn't Governor Krause, but the lieutenant governor's home was impacted. Doctors, lawyers, people who had built 7,000 square foot homes in Coral Gables couldn't live in their homes. So imagine that as an emerging issue, and the demand and expectations being laid out of, what is this? How do we fix it? Who's to blame? That's all coming in a single day. So sometimes emerging issues come out of left field. Hydrogen sulfide, which was the gas being emitted by this drywall, nothing news about that. That's been around as long as there's been rotting food. But this was a new process, a new event, a new product. Drywall isn't normally transported halfway around the world. So kind of an interesting process and a exciting time of life. The next thing that comes in as drywall is kind of going down to a dull roar. Well, in and amongst that, we had a pediatric brain cancer cluster that was declared and investigated in West Palm Beach. A very emotionally charged, uncertain time that involved almost all the state agencies. We got pulled into that. And as that was dying down to a dull roar, a little oil platform out in the Gulf of Mexico blew up called Deepwater Horizon. And 6 months later, I came up for air. So I don't know whether it was just I was in the wrong place at the right time, or if I've got a target on my back, but it seemed that I think a lot of people were breathing easy when I left, saying maybe things will slow down a little bit. So those were kind of my experiences in public health, working for the state of Florida. But in reality, and what I've kind of come to be is a problem solver. We've got issues, not quite sure how to see it, but can somebody look at it and give us an idea? And every one of you has that opportunity as well. You see emerging issues, you see problem issues every day. And I bet every one of you says, this could be done better. We could figure out how to do this in a more efficient way, more effective way, less problematic. So that's what I want to really talk about today is that not only are we critical, environmental health professionals are on the front lines every day. And I know that is kind of hard to plan and strategize and research, but that is really the time you learn so much about your area of expertise. Change is constant. I have seen so much change that occurred within the health agencies, within federal government, within state government. That is just something we all have to accept. It's the speed and direction of that change that is troublesome. And when that speed is dismantling programs and capabilities, we have to be ready and willing to stand there and say, this is going to not end well, and have a plan to rebuild it, not if, but when it's needed, because it will be needed again. A lot of public health threats, emerging issues are seen by the public and us as big and overwhelming. What am I going to do about viruses and antibiotic resistance or mental health care in this country? Admittedly, that's kind of above our pay grade and what we can do as individuals. As agencies and organizations and associations, we can help push the needle. But I would offer an alternative definition of emerging issues happen on a local basis, on a local scale, that impact the public health of the people in your communities, in your neighborhoods, in your offices, in your families. Often they're things that have either never been seen before or not seen in that context. And we can sometimes look at it as maybe it's a newly impacted group. So an example would be lead poisoning in children. Okay, so having a child in the projects in Chicago with lead poisoning would be tragic, but not unheard of. And the doctors, ERs, families, even the facility management who may manage that property, they've heard that story before, and nothing's going to surprise anybody. But when you've got affluent families in Hyde Park, Tampa, who have been renovating 100-year-old homes that have cost well over $1 million, and their private schools are saying something's wrong with Johnny, lead poisoning is not the first thing that comes to mind. So those kind of things should be something we can see and observe and put the pieces together. So, new and emerging issues has kind of been one of the things I've been dealing with. I hope today you're able to walk away with some of the points I'm trying to make today, is one of them being public health has always been under assault. Okay, we tell people, hey, you need to eat your veggies. Hey, you need to use a septic system and not just a hole in the woods. Hey, you need to apply disinfectants to these things. And so sometimes we're not the fun kid at the state legislature giving them great news. So pushback from policymakers and the public is nothing new. What you do is critically important to everyone in this society. And the next public health threat that threatens our neighbors is coming. It's inevitable. In my short 30 years, I've seen 3 or 4, and that's a lot to me. Now that we're removing by chopping away and doging this and chainsawing that, the surveillance programs, we're not going to see the enemy until he's on our front doorsteps. We're not going to have the benefit of those programs in the local areas or enough people to track illnesses and disease until it's already observable. So rest assured, nobody go anywhere. You're going to be needed. In this time, what we need to do is really establish yourself as a trusted resource for your community. So a reliable inspector, someone who gives sound guidance and recommendations and even enforcement and get your programs going where they need to go. Spotting and those emerging trends. That's what we're going to talk about today. And then taking action to protect our communities and neighbors is certainly challenging. It may be daunting, because when you're standing up saying, hey, we've got this thing to deal with, it is fulfilling. So one of the ways, having most of my background in public health and indoor air quality is, what does it smell like? What is what's that smell? And it's kind of funny, but I'd say 40-50% of the indoor air quality complaints was somebody smelled something that wasn't right. But what does a emerging health threat smell like? What is it? How can you observe it? What leading indicators might be coming around? Ironically, sometimes they smell nice, sometimes they smell poorly. Okay, I dealt early in my career on soot issues in homes where there was no combustion products, no combustion appliances, no fireplace. Where's the soot coming from? And it turns out they were the prettiest smelling aromatic candles you could imagine. So this is probably back in 95, 96, we started getting these complaints of soot damage. Builders were buying back homes because they would clean up the soot and it would come back. It looked like somebody had a fire in the place. And it was on the walls, it was in the refrigerator, in the dishwashers, on the plastic, on the carpet, and visibly staining the property. Some people, equated it to, underground contaminants or outdoor contaminants. And at the time, there was a big craze, and there were billions selling candles. And I had some words I had to eat later on, because the first few complaints that I had about this, I said, there is no way that a candle can produce that much soot. I was wrong. The question was, what's in that soot? Because soot coming out of a diesel engine is highly carcinogenic, causes all kinds of problems. What does soot look like that's coming out of a candle? Well, that led to my master's research and a thesis, and actually several litigations that Prop 65 attorneys brought up in California. It turns out some of the candles actually were emitting lead. To keep that little wick from flopping over into the wax, let's just put a wire in it. Well, that wire was 98% lead. Melted fine, and it actually aerosolized very well. And one of the things I did in research at the University of South Florida was to quantify the emission rates of lead and soot as well as benzene from these candles. And I can tell you that's not vanilla that you're burning in that candle. Styrene, toluene, benzene, methylethyl ketone, It's a nice long list of volatile aromatics. And it turns out there was a very interested group who were involved in this, who just showed up at some of the depositions, and because where do you think they get the wax from? BP, Texaco, Chevron, okay? Luckily, most of that has subsided. I rarely see soot damage in homes from candles, but it will come back without regulatory oversight. So I can tell you most public health issues that we're going to see today, they have some distinctive odor or not. They have some sound to them, whether it's complaints, phone calls, media reports. Sometimes it's related to the issue itself, but usually you're going to hear it from gossip. You're going to hear it from meetings like this. You're going to hear it from people who are describing their daily work and hearing something that they haven't heard before. And then what do they look like? They look like everything else. And it is our human nature to say, oh, I've seen that before, and I put it in that pigeonhole. I put it in that bucket. I deal with it this way. But when it keeps falling out of that bucket, and it doesn't respond, and it isn't fixed, it isn't addressed that same way, it might be an emerging public health threat. Preparing for unknown challenges ahead. Wow. The trend that I've seen over the past 15, 20 years is to train public health graduates to be more generalists than specialists. We've been put in this position simply because we don't have enough funding to fund and fulfill all the positions. We need backstops, we need backups, we need people to be able to step in when somebody needs to go on leave or vacation or they're sick. So we all become generalists at the expense of becoming highly specialized and highly knowledgeable in the area that you really, really need to be. So I think that's one aspect we need to consider and maybe take this time to select areas of specialization that can both fulfill us personally and help our clientele. Develop and foster relationships. You know what I said it was about gossip? It was about things that you're hearing from your colleagues or people you work with around the state. So on the issue with Chinese drywall, I had been the state toxicologist for less than a month. And I meet with Doc Kokel, who's the public information officer for the state. Really great guy. He comes around and is introducing himself. He says, what do I need to know? What's the next big thing that's going to hit me here? I said, well, what I've been hearing, because I'd just come in from the private sector. I said, this thing called Chinese drywall, it might blow up. And if it does, it'll be the biggest thing this agency has ever dealt with. And it literally consumed the Florida Department of Health for 18 months. It was the largest product recall by the Consumer Product Safety Commission. At least 10,000 homes were built with Chinese drywall that had to be gutted, no insurance. This was a $10 billion problem that this country went through. Mostly in Florida, Louisiana, Virginia, but there were pieces of drywall that showed up in Arizona and resulted in houses having to be gutted. So that, I'll say that bold statement that I made to him and said, you might want to be ready for this. It kind of put me in a position of, oh, when Krause says you better watch out for this, we better watch out for this. So develop those relationships, because I didn't know this from my own personal experience. I got it from talking to the colleagues who I was working with in other parts of the state throughout that indoor air program and other consultants. So communicate constantly. Work on how to tell your story not only to your colleagues, but to the general public. Take those opportunities to inform people. Foster and protect your professional reputation. Ultimately, it's your word that people are going to rely upon. The agency head, the Surgeon General, the health department director, they're going to come and go. If you want to protect your reputation, protect your reputation. So what is coming over the horizon? So first we want to look at our past, and that's where public health education, reading those history books, learning about Gaucher's disease, learning about the lead poisoning and John Snow, and learning about 1908 when we first started pumping chlorine into our drinking water to prevent cholera. Having a solid foundation in historical public health is extremely valuable. You know, they can say this, expect the unexpected. I don't know how you really do that, but I would say don't deny the unexpected. Do that. Yeah. All right, surveillance versus reconnaissance. There's a big difference. We carry out public health surveillance, which means epidemiologists and public health programs are looking for specific items on a list. Reconnaissance is looking for anything over the horizon. Okay, are we looking for dust clouds? Are we looking for birds or drones? Something unusual, something out of the ordinary, something out of the normal. That's where you're going to see public health issues that are emerging, and frankly, they're the funnest ones to deal with. And then air, food, and water. Those are the big three for us that people are exposed to. So as a toxicologist, again, I was one toxicologist in a sea of epidemiologists and public health professional and radiation technicians and public health physicists. We always look at, where do we spend our time? Indoors. In this country, we spend over 90% of our day either in a house, at a school, at an office, at a store, in transportation. So in those indoor environments, home, schools, work. What are our major sources of exposure? Air, water, and food. The air, and they are not distinct, unique buckets. What's in the air gets in the water. What's in the water gets in the air. What's in the water gets in the food. And that whole cycle. So be careful in saying, well, I only do indoor air. I don't do indoor water. Or I only do water. I don't do wastewater. Well, guess what? We're now in water reuse horizon in which 100% of the water that is discharged from plants, from wastewater treatment plants, will be piped directly back into the drinking water systems. We will see that in the next 30 years. And our technologies to remove the contaminants that need to be removed, they ain't there yet. Indoor air, buildings, what are they made of? What do we build our buildings out of? Drywall, lumber, plaster, concrete. That's where Chinese drywall. I had to learn more about how drywall is made than I ever wanted to know. There are assertions that, they're using, phosphogypsum stacks, phosphogypsum stacks of, from mines to make drywall. Not the case. There was assertions that the desulfurization byproduct that they make drywall at power plants was the contaminated material. That's some of the cleanest material out there. It's way cleaner, it turns out, than material from mines. So you've got those kind of issues. Insulation. It turns out, here's a truism I've come to believe. Whenever we try to make things not burn, things go poorly. Asbestos, great product for what it was designed for. Has left us with generations of remediation and contaminants and cancer risks. Flame retardants. Flame retardants used on cribs and clothing, baby clothing, and air conditioning ducts and carpet often turn out to be carcinogenic. Antimony trioxide is one of which. So, it turns out every time, we make things, we want to make it last a little bit longer. Let's put lead in the paint. That's going to do great, okay? When you burn anything indoors, generally has issues. One that many of you may not have run into, we kind of caught it early on, is a Weyerhaeuser had a product of floor joists that they would put into basements of homes, mostly in the north, Minnesota, Wisconsin, so that they didn't have to finish the basement, didn't have to put up drywall, and could still meet fire codes. In order to do this, they had to treat these I-beam wooden floor joists with a flame retardant. Well, the first round of this was great. They did the testing, no problem, they were allowed to do it. Then someone decided to change the formula. And they changed the formula to a spray-on coating. They didn't bother to test the emissions. And they put it on the market and started selling and started building homes with it. About 2,200 homes in total. These are 2 or 3 story structures if you count the basement. And then all of a sudden, we start getting calls from builders saying, hey, the floor joist manufacturer is calling us and calling our clients, people we've sold the homes to, move out of your home tonight, we'll pay for the hotel. What? What is this all about? They wouldn't share any data. And long story short, it turns out that new coating was emitting formaldehyde. And formaldehyde, carcinogen, okay. Irritant, yeah. The levels that we're seeing in even unfinished homes were 100 times the OSHA limit. They were 3 to 8 part per million of formaldehyde. And it shocked everybody. Now what do you do with these homes? You can't pull out these joists. You can't scrub it off. You can't coat it and seal it. That's a fantasy. And so the steps to remediate these homes became a big issue, safely, so you don't accidentally kill the people doing the remediation. Again, doing things to prevent stuff from burning often ends up poorly. Again, aromatic candles, hey, let's go ahead and burn it. But it turns out the more aromatics, the more smell good stuff you put into the candle, the more smoke produced. So to increase sales, they put a lot of aromatics, cinnamon, vanillin, benzene containing materials into these candles so you'd smell it on the shelf, you could smell it through the wrapping. I tell you, I had the prettiest smelling toxicology lab at the university, okay? I tested over 200 candles, quantified the emission rate of soot, benzene, and lead. It was, and just sitting on the shelf, they were cooking off enough benzene to give me background readings. So, what's wrong with a candle? It's fine. It's soothing and relaxing. And then most recently, dealing with vaping products. Now, they've come back into the press again and into the news, being able to, these one-time use disposable vaping products. I was a contributor to and co-author of a white paper on e-cigarettes and vaping devices a few years ago. And a lot of the things we warned about as far as we don't know what's in this stuff might be dangerous. The childhood poisoning aspect of refillables was first and foremost in our minds. And how many have been to a facility where they make the flavorings and additives in that they put into vaping? Oh my God. If you ever go into one of those, you would never touch the stuff. The recent studies and the reports are looking at these one-time use devices and the metals, the heavy metals that are in the cheaply produced material, as releasing lead, antimony, cadmium, the usual stuff you get in your cigarette. So this isn't surprising, and that it is being portrayed as a healthier alternative to smoking. I mean, is a 38 less deadly than a 45? Okay, but let's not argue semantics here. So these are the kind of things as far as consumer products and building materials that I have dealt with so frequently in my career. Ventilation and the role it plays in the spread of control of diseases. That's another big one you're going to see on the the next round of this. We will have another virus or bacterial-based infection control issue. It's inevitable. One of the hardest things that the media and other professionals would argue with me about when the first COVID-19 recommendations were coming about ventilation was they said, double check, inspect your ventilation system, make sure it's up to code, make sure it's the right one and it's adequate. It was never intended. An adequate ventilation system was for acceptable indoor air. It was never intended, nor was it ever capable of providing protection against infectious diseases. And that caveat to, here, go spend your time and money figuring out if your system is up to par. If it's up to par, great, but it's not going to help you. It's not going to be protective. And then, of course, the EPA and their absence in enforcing FIFRA, Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act rules and regulations about claims on efficacy certainly made a lot of issues. But that fight's not over yet. So when we talk about indoor air, it's everything from carpet to how buildings are constructed. It's one of my favorite ones is the paints that we use and store and sometimes put in our ventilation rooms or mechanical rooms. If human beings can do something, what's the word, stupid, that it just makes you want to do a forehead palm plant, they'll do it. The strangest things as far as carpet manufacturing and carpet installations can lead to odors, and sometimes they're one-time issues. There's a lot of esoteric one-off, this happens under a certain set of circumstances, but educating yourself on those kind of things certainly helps. But what's in that air also reflects, what's in the water. So, not only the capacity and availability of water, but water is used to cool your building. So if you don't have good water or enough water, you're not going to be cooling the building, right? And of course, recreational water, spas and swimming pools, we'll talk a little bit about that later, but just water scarcity is on the horizon, and that, I predict, will be the next big challenge we all have to face, no matter what you're doing. If you're doing indoor air, if you're doing food, if you're doing wastewater, rural community wells, if you're dealing with municipal water systems or disease outbreaks, water is going to be a central point of everyone's job as we move forward. Food. All right, so most of the time this group, when we're thinking food, we're thinking, okay, delivery, iced, cooled, heated, temperatures, handling. As a toxicologist, I'm thinking, okay, what's in the river that's getting in the fish? What's in the ocean that's getting in the shrimp that is being uptaken by the scallops and the oysters, or bees. Luckily, I didn't go down that path. I almost did my doctoral research on bee populations right before they started crashing, so I missed that one. But without bees, it turns out a lot of our crops don't get pollinated. And so that's a really important little group we need to take care of. So a real short side point. When I was doing the research on candles, one of the assertions was, use beeswax candles. That's pure, that's natural, that's good to go, no problems, no additives. Guess where bees go? Into the fields, onto every pollinated and pesticide treated and fertilizer treated flower and citrus fruit. And so the levels of pesticides we were finding in beeswax candles kind of floored everyone. So not only is it making its way into the wax that we're dealing with, but also dealing with the, killing the bees as well. So how do we spot an emerging public health threat? Darn good question. I would use this as an example. When I say water is going to be our issue, what we use to make water safe, I'm going to use this word as a toxicologist, what does safe mean? Safe, we add chlorine. Been doing it since 1908 when New Jersey started putting this in Jersey City. So we've been pumping chlorine into our water for a minute or so. And, there it is. So, it turns out chlorine corrodes and releases metals. And so the more chlorine, the more we corrode, we create other issues. So that water quality is a constantly moving thing. Now, I know it's often not in the environmental health agencies or groups' purview to manage this, but you need to understand it. You need to understand that everything we seem to do to fix a problem seems to create two others. Disinfectant byproducts, okay? Trihalomethanes, haloacetic acids, nitrates are created by the simple effort to disinfect the water. So we are creating carcinogens in order to battle the bacteria. The rates of waterborne pathogen disease in this country are rising. They continue to rise. They've gone up over 650% since 2012. That's not a resounding public health victory. And I don't think, other than during COVID when nobody was going anywhere, the rates have not really taken a dive. So, we're dealing with the water quality, the chemistry we're using or attempting to use to manage that water quality, and of course the bacteria biofilms that are finding a home in our water systems. For the most part, water in this country is only regulated at the municipal level. So until it gets to the water meter. Once it's past the water meter, it's somebody else's issue. And waterborne pathogens from outbreaks associated with drinking water have been dominated since 2015 by Legionella and other biofilm-associated pathogens. And these are not the things that we normally test for in our municipal water systems or even in our recreational water. We only look at it after there's been an outbreak and the bodies are starting to stack up. Maybe that'll change, but another aspect we need to see is that's contributing to this ever-increasing problem is that water availability is becoming less and less, right? Conserve water. That right there is, I believe, a 750,000 gallon tank on Catalina Island. That's how they store the water. Turns out it's lined on the inside to keep it from rusting with PCB containing coatings. So again, in order to make one thing work, you've got to use some other dubious issues. Everything we do to conserve water within buildings, properties, schools, hospitals, increases the risk of waterborne pathogens growing, amplifying, and causing people to get sick. But we've got to conserve water because we're running out. So which is it? That hasn't been solved yet. Keep that in mind. So we talked a little bit about emerging issues. What about AI? Is it coming for my job? Is it going to replace me? Honestly, I don't think AI could ever replace you guys. Okay? Don't be worried about AI coming for your jobs. Worry about AI coming for your water. So, this is what we think about AI. This nice, clean, pristine black box with computers in it, right? That's the reality of AI. It's a huge construction project built in the desert, trying to keep computer chips cool with technologies that suck up water at upwards of 1 million gallons a day. There are events and there are stories coming out currently, one recently in the New York Times of basically ruining the water table and wells in rural areas nearby. Well, this AI center is in just outside of Abilene, Texas. Sure, they got plenty of water there, right? Not so much. Don't worry. We're going to use a closed loop system. that does direct computer chip cooling. So a closed loop system of magical water that goes through and doesn't leak, doesn't corrode, doesn't grow nasties, doesn't pose any health risk, right? Sounds great. Tell me more. Well, it turns out in order to make that work, you use a product that contains dielectric fluids. Dielectric fluids are ones that basically, if it leaks, it's not going to make your computer start sparking and burn out. They even have dielectric fluids. You can even run the computers in the fluid, an immersion type system. Great. Tell me more. This is great stuff. It transfers heat. It's non-corrosive. It doesn't evaporate, except it does. What's in dielectric fluids, or what are most currently available dielectric fluids made of? PFAS, polyfluorinated alkylated substances, which are the things we're worried about at 7 parts per trillion in our drinking water. We're putting it in the barrelfuls into the AI centers. Until we actually start some efforts to stop introducing the problem before you are worried about downstream. Let's stop filling the boat with water instead of worrying about trying to bail it with a thimble. This right here is a graphic from Bloomberg News, and you can see all the little red dots are current and planned AI centers, AI data centers that are scattered around the U.S. And you can see a lot of them are in drought-prone areas, or in high population areas. So those are some of the things we need to think about that AI data centers are going to, if they continue on this path, demand more electricity and more water than most communities use to begin with. If we're putting them in agricultural areas, we are inherently stealing the water that we need to grow the crops. We're worried about biosolid contamination that has been used on plants, on fields that contain PFAS. What happens when, without any regulatory oversight, without any testing, inspection, requirements, rules, these data centers start just dumping the old fluid out the back door? Because no one would ever do that, except they did. So, again, AI, we've got our work cut out for us on are they coming for our jobs? Maybe. I think the environmental issues that data centers in general are currently and will produce in the future will be front and center in all of our efforts as we move forward. So what do you do? What can you do in order to address your time in purgatory, if it's that? Learn from the past. 50 years ago, next year, the 50th anniversary that Legionnaire's disease first was recognized at the Bellevue Stratford Hotel in Philadelphia. Some of you may recognize the line list. These photographs are from a wonderful exhibit at the CDC, which I think they had to take down. This was a crisis. This was a crisis that was in everybody's face for months. They weren't sure if it was bioterrorism, if it was chemical contamination, if it was, a newly discovered infectious disease. And one little odd side note on this is that at the Bellevue Stratford 2 years before, there had been frankly the same outbreak. No response from the federal level. And it really goes to show you, what's in a name. Because if that outbreak of pneumonias of unknown origin had been investigated and they had actually done the work 2 years prior to find out what was happening, we wouldn't be calling it Legionnaire's disease. It was the association that was having their convention there that had the outbreak was the Order of Oddfellows. And so we'd be talking about Oddfellows disease at this point. But at the time, Legionnaires, veterans had, I'll say, a bit more political influence than they do today, and there was great concern and steps. This immediately became a nationally notifiable disease, and has been in that position ever since. So we can all take advantage of those opportunities. When we start seeing issues at the local level, have those relationships with folks at the federal or the state levels to be able to have those conversations. I think I see something that's different. Can you help? Now, you may get them so they won't answer your phone again like me, but it's a start. And advance your opportunities. In the Army, they used to tell you, well, this is just an opportunity to excel. So, take the bad parts and the work that you need to do, and don't hesitate, because all of these things that we're talking about, emerging issues, and in my opinion, issues surrounding water, how we use it in both recreation, in memorials, in decorative features, as well as just everyday washing the dishes, we can't live without it. The fastest way to empty a community is to turn off the water. The fastest way to empty a building, a school, a university, turn off the water. We can't live without it. Towns can't live without it. And if we don't have safe, effective, and adequate water, we're not going to be doing this. So, opportunities abound. I thank you very much for your time and attention today, and best of luck in the coming year.
Thank you, Dr. Krause. We appreciate you coming in at the last minute to close us out today. Pretty sobering. And I did write down one note, and I hope my staff are taking note of this. There will be many opportunities to excel at NEHA in the near future.
Absolutely.